Hello, guys. This is your favorite BPM coach. Our objective here is to tutor you so that, especially as a beginner, you can really get the best. You can really have a large impact in your workplace. You can enjoy the work because process modeling is fun. It's one of the fundamentals of business process management. Without understanding this fundamental, your field, your work in the business process management or business analysis field, you're going to have lots of challenges. You will have lots of challenges. So as we always say, we make these very short videos, but we want to make them very effective and want you to get as much information out of this as possible. What are we trying to achieve today? We trying to make sure that before you even open your modeling software, so whether it's Visio or Eris or Prime BPM, before you even open your software, you need to have a meeting or a workshop with your business users, your business stakeholders. You need to understand the process context, and this is then a guideline in terms of how you can establish that context. Okay, cool. So you will typically have a meeting with your business stakeholders, right? So let's say in this case, there's the procurement of services that's the scope of work. So the BPM leader said to you, look, Joe, you're a BPM analyst or a BPM practitioner. I want you to help document this business process called the procurement of a service. So you then sit with your business users. You first need to understand what is meant by a service. So they will say to you, look, we usually have skills training sessions. So we'll get somebody who's a sales facilitator. They will come and facilitate sales training at our organization, or team building, or catering events. If you think of year-end function or awards ceremonies that the company has. You will then ask them who requests services in the organization, and they will say to you, typically it's anybody. Anybody can be a requester of a service in the organization. You will then ask them who are the approvers of the service, and then they would tell you, they'd give you that information that, there are individuals in the organization that have certain mandates and they have certain access to the system to do these approvals. They need to do the approvals in line with the procurement policy. So again, you will get all of that information and try to get the actual documents that they're referring to. So if they're talking about a procurement policy, try to ask them for a copy of that policy so that you can also have it on record. They will tell you what the systems are that they use. So in this case, it's the online service catalog. And then they will tell you, other stakeholders in the process. So once this request is fulfilled, has been approved by the organization, then it will go externally to a vendor. They will also tell you, what happens, or you should ask them, actually. You should ask them, look, if we have a request for training, that's fine if the vendor's on the system. But what if there's an unusual sort of request and we don't have those vendors on the system? We don't have those services on the system, on the catalog. And then they would typically tell you that we would then have to log a request with the procurement department, and they would have to follow their process to get this vendor on the system. So in a nutshell, it's in conversation, just have a relaxed conversation, but try to get as much information as possible. And so at the bottom of the screen, you will see what we've been able to establish in just a 10-minute conversation with our business users. We already know the context. This process is about the procurement of services. We already know our actors. I've established that there are 3 actors in this process. Hence, we also know that we need 3 swim lanes. We need a swim lane for the requester, we need a swim lane for the approver, and we need a swim lane for the vendor. We also know our systems that we use in this process. In this case, it's the online service catalog, which is hosted by the procurement department. We also know the policies involved in this process, and it's called the procurement approval policy. We also know the interfacing processes. So we know that if a vendor does not exist on the system, we have to log a request with the procurement department so that they can get that vendor on board. And now we can, I think we've got enough information to start our first process map. So let's get into that. Okay, guys, so I've prepared a template for you. Now you can open your modeling software. And in this case, you remember you always need to give your process a name. So in this case, it's the procure vendor service. You need to write down your actors. So we already know that the first actor or swim lane is for the requestor, who is in our organization. We're just calling it our organization. So you can call it the Tom Ford Company. Okay. Then number 3, you will have your approver. So you will write them down in the swim lane. And then we also know externally we have the vendor who will then provide the goods or service. Okay, we've got enough information. Let's get cracking. Before, if you are mapping in BPMN 2.0, which is what we're doing now, all your processes need to sort of start with a start event or an interfacing process. So in this case, we know that we need a service. A service is required. And we can be specific. We can say it's a training service that is required. Remember, I am mapping with Visio. So I've already done a tutorial on how you can get started with Visio. It's literally drag and drop, very easy. And a lot of companies use Visio. So we then know, based on the context that the users have given us, that our first step is to check on the system whether the service exists on the service catalog. So what you do is you go to your far left and you'll see your BPMN basic shapes. You select the task shape, put it right next to your event, and you can then type. You can say that they need to check whether service exists on the service catalog. Okay, that's our step 1, our first activity. You connect your activities, drag and drop, very easy. Then it might be that the service does not exist on the service catalog, right? It won't always exist. So then you select a gateway, and we're going to make this gateway an exclusive gateway. Just connect our gateway quickly to our activity. So, and then we have a question here, service exists on the service catalog. Making so many errors today. And then we will have either a yes or a no. So let's deal with the no first, and we call that activity number 2. Guys, you can see I'm dragging from the left, and then I'm just moving it onto our canvas, connecting sequence flow. So then we will have activity number 2, and that activity number 2 is, so if the service does not exist on the catalog, so no, it does not exist, then we're saying that the user would have to request the service. Okay, and how is this done? Let's assume it's done via email. So you right click on your object, and then you will get a task type, and you will say it's done via email. So they will send an email, right? And this email then goes to the procurement department. Remember what we said, guys. So you'll take, again, go back to your the menu items on the left. So you take us, I think that this is going to be a sub process, right? So I'll call it SP1, and I will say here, and I'll tell you why I say it's a sub process. So let's just call the sub process manage procurement service catalog. Okay, let's first connect, and I'll tell you why I suggest we use a sub process. So because this service doesn't exist on the catalog, we will log a request. We send an email to the procurement department. The procurement department, they have to do a lot of things before they can add that vendor or that service to the catalog. So it's not just sending an email, them receiving an email and then just adding this. So it's not an activity that happens. This is an activity. Step 2 is an activity. You write and open your MS Outlook, type an email to the procurement department, hit the send button. This can literally happen in less than 2 minutes, less than 3 minutes. Something like this does not happen in 2 or 3 minutes. It will probably take a good amount of time for this to happen. There's other stakeholders in the process. There's approvals. They need to get quotes. They need to get the addresses of these vendors. There's a whole lot of stuff that happens in here. Hence, I feel that this will be a sub process, also based on my experience. Okay, cool. So once you're done with this, if the service does exist on the service catalog, then we move to step 2. If it does not exist, I mean, but if it does exist, then we just need to add another activity, and that activity is so, and let's just call yes, let's just call this connector yes, to say that, yeah, the service does exist on the catalog. Then we can have a step 3 where the user can then now request the catalog. Okay, cool. So that is done. Once the user has completed the request will then flow through the approver. So here I've already pre-modeled those activities for you guys so that we can save a bit of time. I think you get the gist of, you've had your conversation with the business users, and now you simply mapping the process. I think because a process map is not just for yourself or for your BPM lead or for your business users, it needs to be accessible. And when it's accessible, it needs to be, people need to be able to follow it, even though they have nothing to do with the procurement of services. So it's always best to add a note to explain what your SP1 is. You can add notes to anything on your diagram to just make it easy for people to follow. So I've already just created a narrative earlier, and I'm just going to paste that narrative here. So in my narrative, I'm saying to the stakeholders that in this sub-process, SP1, the procurement department will review the request, right? That the requester is sending. They will confirm the validity in line with the procurement strategy, and they will then determine how this request should be fulfilled. And that is basically what I've put there. I'm connecting this note to the object so that it's just there, right? Guys, let's continue with our process. We've now completed all the activities that the requester needs to fulfill. If you go back to your map, before we go to the approver, you will realize that we did not say we did not create a systems object, right? So we didn't create a systems object and, I don't know, call this the service catalog procurement system. We did not do that. So ideally, you should be doing that and just linking your object to your activity, because there could be other systems in this process. So you would want to put down the names of the different systems. And also number 3, activity number 3, where I'm toggling right now, that also happens on the system. So again, you would have had to copy and link activity number 3 as well. But so that's the conventional way of doing it. Another way you could do it is by color coding your objects. Of course, you need to agree with your BPM lead so that you guys can agree on the colors. So because this happens on the service catalog, let's say you agree that you will color this green. Okay. So whenever somebody looks at this model and they see green, they must know that it happens on the service catalog. So step number 3 also then happens on the service catalog. Let's say, for argument's sake, step number 2 did not happen via email. It happened on another system, the blue system. Then you would have connected your blue system, you have created a blue color here. Guys, as when you do this, just always make sure that you have a menu, a legend icon, a legend block at the bottom where you will say, just so to guide other people, to say happens on ABC system, right? And you can just remove, for now, you can remove that that email icon. So let's say task type. So none, just remove that. And then when you see a green icon, then you must know that it happens on the service catalog, which is your procurement system. Okay. There you go. So there you've got, just call it a legend. So this is also how we do it in practice. Guys, remember, we've been in this field a very long time, so we know exactly what we're talking about. This is also effective so that you also save space on your diagram. Imagine having to put systems object everywhere. It's going to clutter your diagram. Okay, guys, back to, so hopefully that tip will help you. When the requester has submitted the request, then we will have the approver who will review the service request in line with the procurement policy. Again, this happens on the service catalog. So I'm going to make that green like we have the others. Oops, that's not the right color green. Also be consistent with your colors, right? And we also know that this happens in line with the procurement policy. So why don't we go back to our menu on the left and see if we can get an object and just call that the procurement policy, right? So procurement policy, which you will obviously try to get a copy of so that you can have all your supporting documentation. And then you just link your procurement policy to the activity. So the approver then reviews the request. If this request does not meet the approval criteria, I've already shown you how to use this gateway. So if it's a no, then he will reject the service request. It's best practice to, if you want to share any other information with the readers of this process. So you could say the user should add a note to explain why the request is rejected. Then step 6 is where the requester will get an rejection notification, and essentially that's where the process will then end. So this is rejected. We are not getting a training for a sales training service provider. But if the request that does move the approval criteria, then the approver will approve the request. And step 8, just look at I've shown you in the previous lessons how to distinguish between a manual object, a user object, an email object, and so forth. So just note my step 8 here says the system. So this is an automatic function on the system. Once the request is approved, step 7, the system will then issue a request to the approved vendor to start the fulfillment process. Now I'm going to zoom out a bit. I've added a separate pool and swim lane at the bottom to just distinguish what happens in our organization versus what happens in outside organizations. So here we see that we have our vendor. I just need to make sure that step number 7 is also green because it happens on the procurement system. So is step 5, also happens on the procurement system. And so is step 8. It's the procurement system that will issue this approved request to the vendor. The vendor will then receive their request via email, step 9, and they would have to fulfill this service request. Here, I can just make this maybe a different color. We actually don't really remember in fulfilling this request, sub-process 2, there is again some interaction with us because we have to receive the request. But for now, I just stop the process here so that I just share the gist with you guys. So guys, before you open your process map, we have reached the end of our video. I hope this was helpful. just remember, before you map your process, you need to sit with the users and you need to establish the process context. You need to interview them and you need to ask them, questions about who are the actors in the process, what activities do they perform, which systems do they perform this on, who do they hand over to, which departments are involved, which policies, which forms, which manual forms must be completed. And then what is done by a human, like a user, and what is done automatically on the system, and also try to identify other interfacing processes. So guys, I hope this has been helpful. So just remember, before you start mapping, don't be in a hurry to open your software, do the necessary first. So I hope this was very helpful and that this will help you in all your modeling endeavors. Thank you so much.